Welcome to Disc Flex certification.
In this certification process, I've personally found that when I'm certifying people, the sub-factors, they don't get. They don't understand it. And the reason they don't understand it is it's not something that people intuitively think about. But as soon as you know what a sub-factor is, it's literally like a massive light bulb goes off in your head where you go, how did I not know this? Why don't they teach this in school? If I had known this, I could have dialed up and dialed down my behaviors. So the dialing up, the dialing down of behaviors is fundamentally grounded in what we call sub-factor relationships. And this particular section is going to teach you about the sub-factors, their relationships, and then how to read the reports for somebody so you can coach to it. And also moderate and flex your own behavior. I think this is magnificently fantastic, and it has opened up a world of coaching that is profound. And the discussions that we have around sub-factors and what to do about them, and the dialing up and dialing down and modulating and flexing becomes so much easier when you as the coach understand this and can do it for yourself and then teach somebody what to do and where they are according to their relationships in their factors, which are sub-factor relationships. So let's get started. I'm super, super happy about it. So we know that D, I, S, and C have relationships to each other. We're not in a vacuum here with these factors. So sub-factors are pairings of the highest factor that you have score-wise and the lowest factor that you have score-wise. And what we do is we look at the deltas between them, how much this high one has dominance over, governing power over this low one. Now you can imagine if I'm a high D and I have to make a decision about going to do something right now, or being prudent and wise and kind of holding back and being more thoughtful, and my S is way down here, my D's up here, my D is going to override my S. And we want to know by how much. Now that relationship, that how much, that tension that happens when you have to make those decisions are what sub-factors are based on. It is the relationship between two factors and the delta, the difference between them. Now, if you know what they are, these sub-factors are the relationship between a high D and, for example, a high I or a low I. So the relationship, the difference between a high D and an I can shift as the I and the D kind of go like this. Imagine your D is up here and your eyes are way, 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 way down low. There's a behavior that we call efficiency. That is the sub-factor of efficiency, where this D literally overpowers the little I over here. And that's efficiency. You don't care what people think. You just want to get it done. And you want to get it done the quickest, fastest, most efficient way possible. And that is the sub-factor where the D overpowers the I. That is the efficiency sub-factor. Now imagine this. Imagine if we've got the opposite happening, where you have the I over here dominating the D. This is where you like people. You're super friendly. You're an extrovert. And down here, the D is low. It's, I can get it done. I can get it done sometime. I'm going to get it done whenever I want to. And I'm going to be friendly. I would prefer to be friendly. Now, that particular behavior, when the I completely dominates the D, is called friendliness. So we have 12 sub-factors. When you pair the 4 factors in governing positions, these are sub-factors, and that's what we're going to go over right now, is what are they? Now, if you look at this graph, you can see that when the D and the I are together in a relationship, we're going to start on one side with the D overpowering the I, and that's efficiency. And then on the other side where the I is overpowering the D, and that's called friendliness. And there's a whole bunch of behaviors we're going to talk about in just a little while that are on that spectrum where the D and the I together are creating behaviors. That's what's fundamentally important about subfactors. Now, the same with the D and the S. If you have the D overpowering the S, that is actually called self-motivation, because, you're looking at the D just not being entirely thoughtful or patient or caring. So it's motivated, self-motivated. You want to get things done, man. That is it. Now, if you look at the S over here overpowering the D, that's called patience. There's a whole spectrum of behaviors. So let's go through what they are, knowing that there are 12 subfactors. So I want you to study this graph and study this page. If you are in any kind of mentoring, coaching, team leading, this is so terribly important to understand, because once you get this, you're going to be able to dial up and dial down behaviors at will. And you're also going to be able to recognize and coach people to dial up and dial down their behaviors by just modulating a little bit. A little bit goes a long way in shifting these behaviors up and down when they've got a relationship together. So let's start with the subfactors. The first things you want to understand about this report is we don't go into all 12 subfactors for that particular person. We take the top 3 that govern their behavior out of 12. That we want to know which are their go-to subfactors. So those top 3 are delineated, and those coaching conversations you have about those behavioral choices they make, because they've got a disc factor governing so high above one that is so low, is really important. So the first subfactor, the first governing subfactor, is taken from your highest score of whatever factor it is to the lowest score of whatever factor that is. And in this particular person's report, we're looking at the driving, because their D is 80 and their I is way down here, we're looking at the first subfactor being a DI. That relationship, that delta, is very, very large. It's inordinately large. So we've got a driving subfactor that would govern this person's behavior of efficiency. Now, if you are on a team and you need efficiency, this is your go-to person. Then the next driving subfactor that we look at is whatever the report delineates. So we go down and we take the highest delta, and then we go down to the next lowest one, and then the next lowest one. We take the top 3 big variances. Now, that's on what will drive them and what their strengths of their dominating governing behaviors are. You also want to know what they don't have. Okay. So if you need on a team something, you want to know if your team member has that as a subfactor, a natural behavioral relationship that would produce that type of behavior, or not. Now, if it's a not, that's what we call an opposing subfactor. We dominant versus opposing. I don't have that particular subfactor. It is opposing in my personality, in my behavior. So I have to make sure that I know what they are, especially if you're a team leader. You want to know the dominating, governing behaviors that have these subfactor relationships, and what the behaviors tendencies will be when decisions have to be made, things have to be done. And you also want to know what the team member naturally doesn't have behavior-wise, so that you can make sure that you don't set them up for failure. If they're not really good at this particular behavior, why would you give them a task or an assignment that it centers around that without coaching them or giving them a backup plan or a warning signal? So this is what's really important about these subfactors. So it's your governing subfactor is your first, your driving subfactor, and then your opposing subfactor. And it teaches you how to look at the scores here. Now, in this particular person, their D is 90 and their I in this one is 25. So the delta is the difference between 90 and 25. Now, if you just do the math there, you're going to find that that's a 65-point swing. That is substantial. So whenever there is a decision to be made, they're naturally going to go with efficiency. That's what they're going to do. So these sub-factor relationships are critically important. Now that you know what a driving sub-factor is and how it is so important, now the relationships for the actual people, we want to know about them. And I did mention that this report gives you the top 3 sub-factors that are driving and the top 3 that are opposing, or the lower sub-factors. And it teaches you here how to do that subtraction. So you have to know, because somebody might ask you, well, how are you figuring that out? And how high is the score? So over here, it says the report provides your top 3 sub-factors by analyzing your biggest 3 gaps between the DISC factors. To the right, you'll see in this example, the person's dominant score, as we already mentioned, is 90. Their lowest score is their I, and that is sitting at 25. So their delta is 65 points, which is a very large gap. This means that they're going to be relying very heavily on this particular sub-factor. It is a driving behavior in their persona, and it's called efficiency, and it will completely override their opposing sub-factor, which is friendliness, unless they are conscious of it. Okay, but their natural go-to is efficiency versus friendliness. That's what you need to know, and that's the first one, and that's their top driver and their top opposing. And then when you look at both efficiency and friendliness, they're great when they're used properly, but they do have their faults when they used at the wrong time, like any behavior. So like I said, it's a good coaching moments to know that when these factors have to come out, and we need all of these plethora of behaviors, this toolkit of behaviors coming out at one point or at another, especially if you want to rise in the organization or become, more broad-based in what you can do in your career. You really need to get these behaviors underneath your belt. So knowing what they are is super important. And this is the pages that gives you tips on how to dial up or dial down your behaviors so that you can go across this spectrum. Now let's teach you how to do that.